It's time to start building the Paulk Smart Station. This is the evolution of the previous Smart Stations, total stations, but it's got a new name because it really is redesigned from the ground up. Everything before has helped me get to this point, but after using this for a while, it's one of those things where I think, why didn't I figure all of these things out before? I am really liking it and really excited about it. Well, the first thing I need to do is make some patterns. Now, I'm not going to make every pattern that I need because most of them were made to make the Paulk Smart Bench. So you have to watch that video. Now, I do have the patterns included in the plans that you'll need, all of the patterns. But for the video, since I didn't have to make them, you'll have to go back and watch the other video. I'll put a tag in this video as well as a link in the description, so you'll be able to jump over and take a look at that one if you need a little assistance in making the patterns. So to start with, I laid it out on a piece of 1/2-inch plywood. I show the plywood in the materials list as an option. I don't consider this as part of the bench. Hopefully you'll have some scrap around, or if you get a piece, you'll have a lot left over to make other patterns. I just find it to be the best overall material for patterns, with the rare exception when I might use 18mm. So I start by laying out my patterns in great detail with rulers and tape measures and a pencil to get it exactly drawn out what I want. And then I use my cordless track saw and small track and make the cuts right close to the corners. And now I'm using my Ryoba saw to finish out the corners. Previously I used a jigsaw, but I'm finding this is actually quicker, cleaner, and it lets me cut into the corners real tight. Once I have those cut out, I go over to the router table and cut the slots. These are cut wider and longer so that when I cut out each actual piece, I'll be able to finish up with my hand router and everything will be accurate. I did the same thing with drilling the holes. I drilled them oversized so that instead of having to get out a drill, I'll just plunge in with my router and make them. So again, everything will be identical time after time. Plunging in, I noticed I was getting a little burn, and then I realized that I've had this saw now, this battery saw, for a couple of years and still have the original blade on it. So I had a backup blade. I made a quick change. Should have done that a long time ago. This is the other pattern that was different than the Paulk Smart Bench. It's the side pattern. Now I have the master pattern and you're seeing me use it here. This is the same one that is with the Paulk Smart Bench. It's a little bit smaller than the side holes, or a little bit larger, and a little bit bigger than the middle, but I'm still able to use it. I laid everything out on the side. Of course, that's cut to length and width. I'm not going to be routing the outside of it, just the inside holes. And then I laid it out specifically where I needed it to go. And then I was able to use this master pattern to do part of the cut and then relocate it and finish the cut. And the spacing between and the ends is identical. It's just the matter that the middle hole is larger to allow room for the miter saw. So you can see there, I just shifted it over just a little bit and finished the cut out there. And then with the middle one, again, I was able to go all the way around and finish this cutout and then shift it over to the other side, or flip it over actually, and finish out that middle cut. And then repeat on the far end. And this allowed me to have my side piece. If I were doing the Paulk Smart Bench today, maybe I would start with this and just have the hole spacing the same on the Smart Bench. But that one's done and no reason to change it. Once this pattern is done, I will have one for the Smart Bench and one for the Smart Station. With the patterns done, it's time to start cutting the actual pieces that I'll use. The Sawhorse is identical for both the new benches, and so I was able to grab that pattern and attach it to a piece of 18mm and make that cutout. I used my 1/2-inch upcut spiral bit on my big router, and then I used the small router to cut the slot hole. I decided to give it a try. I like the cordless and use just a 1/4 inch to do the entire cut. It's a bit fatiguing, it's a little noisier, and just doesn't cut quite as smooth as the big one. So I went back to the 1/2-inch upcut spiral for the main cut and just used a smaller one for the narrower openings where the 1/2-inch bit will not fit into. You can see this nesting method, how efficient the use of plywood is. and how quick it is to make these sawhorses. Now there is one minor change to these that I made to the pattern. The internal feet, the two internal feet, I shortened them by about 2 millimeters on the pattern so that they would be just a little bit shorter. I find that it's a little more stable if the ground isn't exactly perfect. Just have it sort of hitting those outside feet mainly. So, and what I did was on my Paulk Smart Bench, I just took a saw and cut those internal feet down that same amount so it matched. So going forward, I'm going to make all my sawhorses that way. Now I'm making the miter track extension supports. They're adjustable, and also they're a little bit longer on the top than my previous versions. Again, because of all the changes to the sawhorses and the main supports, I had to have that top section with the tab be a little bit longer, and hence that's why the previous patterns would not work. Using the same pattern from the Paulk Smart Bench, I'm making the spreader shelf, one that I worked so hard at getting right for so long, and now it's so easy to make them over and over again. I just cut it to length and width, and then lay the pattern on one end, make the cuts, flip it over and do the other. It's ready to go. The spreader pattern works both for the Paulk Smart Station and the Smart Bench. So I made the 4 of them, though there is a change coming you'll see here in a little bit. Then it's time to jump over and use that pattern we made to make the 2 sides. One side will be cut, some more material will be cut away, but to begin with, both sides are identical. Now I'm making the miter track, so I ripped them to the right width and I left them full length. My intention was to run the T-track continually through and then cut them to the right length later. As it turned out, I was too close to the wall, so I cut them shorter and ran them through independently. I set up 2 routers, one with the dado and one with the T-track, and ran it through in one operation. Probably wouldn't recommend this. A lot of times setting it up, getting it just right. I think in the future I'll just make this 2 separate operations. After completing the T-track on all the pieces, I then created that about 1 millimeter deep, 7/8 or wide dado, and that is for the tape measure to be below the surface so that it will be very durable and in transport won't get peeled off. As with all designs, things change, and this was a big change mid-project. I decided that the support for the miter saw on my previous versions was a bit clunky, and so I went back to SketchUp and made a change. It required me to redo the 2 center spreaders, and I basically had to leave a chunk hanging down, and that's going to support the miter saw hanging it rather than holding it from the bottom. So I ran a dado through it, and then I took my existing spreader template. I didn't have to change that, but I just dropped in a piece of 1/2-inch material to block out that corner, and the router ran around that, left the piece I needed with the dado already cut, and then I pulled that piece, flipped it over, and did it the other side. But of course, because those are mirror images of each other. You've seen this operation a number of times in other videos, so this one's going to be quick. Basically using my Parf Guide Mark II with the 6/810. This is just absolute machine shop perfection for getting the holes perfectly square to each other, perfectly laid out, and using that 20 millimeter bit that it comes with, I get an absolute CNC level quality MFT table from the shop. And it's there are other systems out there. This is the only one I know of that offers this level of accuracy. Now I'm cutting away the material from the miter side, and I basically just took a little piece of scrap plywood and made a little guide there for my router to follow, to cut out the little slot that I needed for the base of the miter saw to slip into. Now a 45-degree chamfer bit with just the tiniest amount of it sticking through to chamfer all of the holes and all of the edges. I've stacked the top and bottom together, and I am laying out the screw holes so that I can drill the pilot holes through both at once to save a little time, and also when I begin assembly it'll be quick to put it together as I won't be doing any layout. Now I'm making the assembly spacers. These are different than on the Paulk Smart Bench, obviously, because the spacers are separated further apart from the middle or closer to the ends. Just quick cut the pieces to the proper length and drilled some 50 millimeter 2-inch holes, and they will be used to assemble the spreaders to the sides and also to keep the spreader straight when I'm putting in top and bottom on. Now time to use those spreader spacers and some glue. The pilot holes were all drilled already, so it's just a matter of drilling the hole the rest of the way through and putting the number 6 inch and 5/8 trim head screws in. And before I put the bottom on and get the spacers there, I took my template and made the tab holes for the Sawhorses and the handle in the middle. That handle will be modified, you'll see in a little bit. Then it's time for the glue up. The spacers are in place, the pilot holes are drilled. It's just a matter of pulling the outside frame to the bottom. We know the bottom is perfectly square and parallel, so by pulling the frame to it, we know the bench will be perfectly square. And again, no worry about layout. The pilot holes are drilled. Then a little cleanup before I put the spacers in and get ready to put the top on. Again, before I put the glue on the top, I cut the center handle hole. Again, that will be modified, things that I learned. And then the assembly begins. The glue's on. I just pull the frame to it so top and bottom match up. We know we're perfect. I'm going to cut out where the miter saw goes. I'm not cutting right to the edge. I'm actually leaving a little bit of wood. I'm going to finish up with a flush cut router bit, but I wanted to not be cutting away all that wood. So I first cut that away and then use my Ryoba saw to finish the corners out. And of course my patterns there, I got to label them, the spacers. And now I put a little piece of wood in, I clamped. This is for the pattern bit. The pattern bit is, or the flush cutter bit, not pattern bit, is going to run against the spreaders, but against the back there's nothing there, so I just put that through. Now this is not the final cut. I'm actually doing this to show you how to fit your saw. I know what the dimension needs to be. I've provided it on the plans, but I kind of wanted to show if you were doing a different miter saw how to go about this. So you're going to kind of sneak up on it, starting with a minimum cut and then go back with it. Now finally, you're going to take away that last little piece where the miter saw goes, and then use my router with the flush cut bit to flush everything up. Now I'm going to take some time to detail it up, make sure I get all the sanding done and get all the glue off, and also to bevel over all the edges just so that it's nice and clean and looking good. Next up, I'm going to make the base for the miter saw. I know exactly how wide to make it, making it, just test fitting it to make sure that it slides in there well. And then I made the dado. The dado drops into the front edge. That indexes where the bench goes. I haven't mounted the saw on it yet. I'm working on that. I'm working out the details. I have it designed out, but I need to figure out where the saw fits. I want it out on the front edge, and I was able to figure out here that I needed to cut a little bit more. I'll let you know ahead of time. I'm still not quite there sneaking up on it. I'm going to have one more cutaway, but I keep test fitting and making sure that everything works. The miter extensions, it's important that the flip stop, the body of it, the portion that doesn't flip, falls slightly behind the metal part of the fence. That's obviously important because when I throw the flip stop up, I need the space through there to be absolutely clear. So a lot of little different things. I've given all those dimensions and layouts for the Capex in the plans, but I just want you to be conscious of that if you're fitting a DeWalt or Makita or Milwaukee or something different. Next up is assembling the Sawhorses. I'm going to get the base all put together. This whole portion is exactly like the Paulk Smart bench. I want to get it set up so that I can now put the Paulk Smart Station on top of it to finish up. It's just a lot easier to detail out at waist high rather than working on top of the other bench. With it being cut away there, I wanted to see what kind of strength and deflection there was in the middle. I was really comfortable with that. It felt really good. So I'm not concerned at all about, especially the kind of weight with the miter saw and materials that I will be putting on there. So very strong. I'm liking this 18 millimeter. Still checking to make sure that it stays nice and level as I add weight to it. And now I'm working out the miter tracks. I know the width, and they're cut. The tracks are in. The little dados for the tapes. They're all figured out. What I'm doing now is laying the holes out so that they will line up exactly with the bench holes. I want to be able to use other accessories in the future, and I just want total alignment with the bench for anything future, and of course to clamp it down as well, because I'm personally using the bench dog holes to clamp them down. Now at this time, in my design, I was doing a short set of miter track, and then I was doing an extension to give me that absolutely necessary 8'6" of repetitive cuts for the stop. I went away from that, and what I've provided in the plans is a short set and a long set, completely independent. I've decided that, one, I didn't want to break the tape up. I wanted to keep the accuracy of the tape going from end to end. You do get a little bit of inaccuracy when you split the tape, putting it together back and forth over the years. The other thing I notice in my own workflow is that I use, I figured the shorter size of these, and the reason they stick out beyond the bench, I figured out the dimension I needed to go to often for repeating, and it just wasn't that long, but it was longer than just going to the end of the bench. And so a lot of thought went into why I came up with the length that I did. The longer set, I need that 8'6" for 8-foot doors and large windows, and that's the most repetitive cutting I do, and needing the stops, but I don't do that all the time. I'm gonna say that I need that maybe 20% of my work time. So I decided that having those long ones just separate and stored away separate when I needed them was perfect, and these shorter ones took care of my needs most of the time and also made it easier to get around the bench. I often was putting one of the longer extensions on the Smart Total Station because I needed just a little bit longer, and that was the only way I could get it. Now, I did mention that at this point in time, I'm doing the extensions so that rather than having a full long set, the direction that I went, I was going to just do extensions like on the Smart Total Station. And so I created, lined up the holes so they went through from one miter track to the other. Everything was consistent and uniform. And then I created an adapter piece, a connector, and drilled the holes in it so that everything lined up. You know, it really seemed slick and perfect. And it was when I was putting that together that I found that it just wasn't up to my standards. It wasn't strong enough. There was too much flex in it. I thought I could deal with that, but then that's when I stepped back and decided, what do I really need? I really need long ones once in a while, and I want that tape to go all the way through. So I sort of abandoned this, and I don't have a long set yet. I will do a separate video on making them, but the cool thing is the shorter set, once they're done, they become a template. You just simply start on one end and make your markings from the short one, and even the whole layout from the short one, and then march it down to make it as long as you need. Another thing I'm doing here is the handle that I had on the bottom of the bench. I need the vacuum hose to go through that from the miter saw, and I found that it was just a little too small. So I took my existing pattern and I made it larger. Any future benches, I'll just make them all with that same size. Still fitting here, sneaking up on this thing. I've got my main extensions mounted, and I'm using these little smart connectors which are not on the market. I'm going to be excited to show them to you. I'm trying to talk a company into making them and making them available, but right now I just have some prototypes. I'll show you those a bit later. I do have an alternate way to mount them, and I'll show you that in this video or in a future video as well. So you can see here I'm kind of sneaking up on it. I am turning the saw, flipping the saw all the way over. I'm making sure that no matter which way I turn the saw, that it has free motion. And so I've got it all figured out for the Capex, but again, you'll want to do this with your other saws because they might be slightly different. You want to be able to flip that thing all the way over on a bevel cut and throw it all the way to 60 on a miter and have it go through smoothly. And then here will be my final cut. I'm figuring out the back and what's going to hit, and discovered that there was just a little bit of rubbing when I flipped the saw over, did the bevel and the miter together. So grabbed my board, stuck it back into the distance I needed. It took the router, routed it right off. Pretty easy to keep moving that thing back. So if you do anything, leave a little bit extra that you can cut away later. Another thing that I changed from all the previous total stations is how to hold it down. I used to have this wedge, this shim basically, that was free floating and it could get lost. And I decided just to make a cam. So I just took a piece of scrap plywood and a 2¼ inch hole saw, cut a round, I only needed one, And then I took a piece of plywood I ripped, just a piece of scrap, just a rectangle long piece, tapped it in the hole with some glue, and then sheared it off with a chisel. So I plugged that middle hole that the pilot bit from the hole saw left, and then I drilled a new 1/4 inch hole 5 millimeters off center. And then, and of course, all this is laid out on the plans, but then I drilled a hole and bolted it through. And then when I rotate that, because it becomes a cam at that point, it holds the miter saw down and it's always there. I really like it. It was a simple idea, nothing that, is a magic invention of mine, but it just came to me that that would work really well, and it's always there and it'll work with any saw. Next up, I'm going to make the flip stops. I am setting up to make, I'm going to cut enough parts for 4, but I'm only going to assemble 2 right now. I'm using my sled. I've set the blade height at what I need, and I've laid out enough of these, and I made them 5 millimeters apart so that I have enough room to cut them to the final length. But you can see how easy it is to just keep pushing it through the table saw and make those. Now I'll just cut them up, the bodies up on the miter saw to the exact width that I need. And next up, I will cut the flip stops, ripping some material, and then cutting them to the proper length, and then cutting a little bevel on the corner, and then rounding that over with a sander, drilling the hole. I'm just talking fast here. The plans show all of this kind of stuff. Really easy things to make. And then just bolt them together, with a few nuts and a long carriage bolt. You see me kind of rounding that corner. That's just so when you flip it up, if I left it square, when you flipped it up, it would be bottoming out on the miter track. So again, I'm just assembling here. I put them together all so that the flip stop is a little bit away from the body so that I can make it closer or further away. It gives me a lot of adjustability for fine tuning and making the cut exactly what I need. So here you can see my idea at the time for having an extension. It looks really good. I could have probably worked on a thicker splice piece, maybe moved the support in a little further. And I did play with some of that, but I didn't like the flex. And again, I stood back and thought about it and realized that I just wanted to have separate long ones and separate short ones. Here you can see I'm just sort of putting it all together. I'm putting the router table on it. I've got the extensions on it. Just trying to get a feel for everything. Of course, I had the Paulk workbench that you've already seen, the Paulk Smart Bench, and setting them up in a different way than I've done before. I want to kind of play around with spacing and how that I'm going to use everything, and how the table saw is going to interact with the router. Got some interesting stuff that I'll be bringing to you later in the table saw and the outfeed, the router table being an outfeed. That is working out very well. So the bench is all done at this point, other than making the longer miter tracks, which again are just longer versions of what I've already done, and putting the tape measure on. So this is the final step, and I want to be very accurate. So I cut them to length to begin with, and then I made a mark. I first made a cut with a piece of scrap and made a mark on the miter track, and then laid the tape out, the double stick tape. And then once I got that pressed down really well, I took a little bit of the middle, about 4 inches of it out where the mark was, and I laid the tape and stuck that down really well. And once it was stuck right on my line, so I knew it was going to be very close to accurate, then I pulled the rest of the backer tape so it would stick it down. And I use a wider tape. It's 7/8 inch tape measure, and they give you 3/4 tape. So I buy 1 inch tape in addition to what comes with it. And then, of course, I have 1/8 of an inch of that tape sticking out, so I have to cut it away. I wish that FastCap would just include a 7/8 tape that exactly matches their peel and stick tape, because I want it stuck down right to the edge so it won't get plucked up when I'm moving it around. Well, once that's done, I just double check, and if I'm off a little bit, I move the flip stop in or out and get it exactly perfect. And then the final thing I do is I need a story pole to cut shorter pieces. So I make a 20-inch one and write save on it, and I make a 400 millimeter one and write save on it. Those are part of the tool, just like the flip stops. They work great, much better than building some big clunky stop that sticks into the blade. I've seen lots of those. They just don't work that well, and they're clunky, and also you lose a lot of cut capacity. So I really find that just having a little story pole is the best way to go. I was finalizing the edit for this video to show you how to build the Paulk Smart Station, and I realized I missed something very important, and that is how I connect the miter tracks, the short ones as well as the long ones, to the bench. And the reason I forgot to show you that is I didn't create the hold downs on my miter tracks because I use something different. I use this Smart Connect with a speed knob. Unfortunately, this is something I've been working on with a tool company to design for my needs. It doesn't exist on the market. I'm going to use these to attach all of the fixtures, the router tables, the bench extenders, the miter tracks, as well as some other cool things that I'm thinking about working on, like attachments, plywood attachments that go across the top and run down the side that will hold things like vices and things. But anyway, that's another thing. So I have these. They're not on the market. I hope they will be. I'm pushing for the company to provide them. It won't be my product, it'll be theirs, so they need to see a need for them. So hopefully I'll be telling you about these and saying, here, go buy them here in the near future. But two things. One is they may not become a product on the market, not available to anybody, or even if they do, there may be areas that people build by bench that these won't be in your market. So I have to come up with an alternative, and I did that. And so I've come back to the shop here to shoot this video to add on, and I'll show you what I've done to this one so you can see how I attached it. And then I haven't done it to the other one yet, so we'll do that one together so you'll see how to do it. It's real simple, and it's with stuff that you're already going to get for other parts of the bench, and they're easy to get online or at your hardware store. And that's essentially two connectors that I will show you the placement for them, and they're on the plan. This is shown on the plan. It's a 2-inch /20 hex head. I didn't have any hex heads. I'll get some. These happen to be Phillips heads, but /20 hex heads, 2 inches long, with a washer, and then a /20 knob. You're already going to be getting some of these for other things, and so I have these on the materials list. But essentially, I drill a hole that is big enough for the washer and deep enough so that the hex head and the washer will sit just below the surface. I've got two spots in here that I've chosen. Could be really kind of anywhere. I just didn't want the knob so close to the end of the bench, the front edge of the bench, or this side of the bench that you couldn't get up in there and tighten it up. I wanted room for my hand. So I picked these two spots here. It could have been over here, but it'd been a little tight. So anyway, I picked these spots, and this is the location that I show on the plan. Although the way I'm going to show you how to cut them, kind of ignore paying attention to all my dimensions and stuff. Just do it this way, and it'll be a lot simpler. To attach the miter track, and it doesn't matter if you're doing the long one or the short one, these holes are going to be in the same place. I will take a bench dog, and it doesn't matter what bench dog you use. I'll grab two random here, but I know about where it goes, and I'll line it up to the holes, and I'm going to drop it in. A couple of bench dogs, you could use more than two, but at least two, because you want to line up the holes and get your alignment. I mean, you've drilled the holes, so you want to make sure that alignment is maintained. Now, I didn't have to worry about that with these because they're just going to drop through any of the holes. But anyway, so I got my bench dog in, I've got it aligned, and then I am going to drill the holes. So I've already done it on these, so all I really have to do now is drop those in, and they will line up obviously perfectly with the holes already in the bench because I've drilled them through at the same time. And then I take one of these knobs on the material list, no washer needed underneath, and tighten it down. And that the bolt head is below the surface, which is necessary. And then I do the same thing with the other one, another one of these knobs. Alternately, I don't show this on the plan, but I've shown it on plenty of videos. If you want to save $1 or so, if you've got some 1/4 20 nuts and you've got a hole saw, this one happens to be 1.5 inches, but you can go through the hassle of drilling that, sanding the edges, and then countersinking the nut in and kind of gluing it in there, and then it will work exactly the same as this. And you saved about $1, maybe $2 for each one. All right, so now you know how it goes off and on. It's really quick and easy. I'm going to show you how to drill it on the other side. Take your miter track, which you've already built and detailed out based on the plans and the video. You won't have the tape measure on yet because I had that alternate connection. I had done it then. You'll want to make this connection because you want it fixed in place so it goes in the same place every single time for your tape measure to be accurate. But put it in its position and you know it's going to line up because the holes for the bench and the holes for the extension are going to line up. So I know where it goes about with me, and I could be off a full set of holes, but I'm going to see that. So I know it goes to there, and I'm going to eyeball it, get it close, and then grab some bench dogs, whatever 20 millimeter bench dogs you have. It really doesn't matter, but pick a couple of holes and line them up. And then you can take the plans and measure to this location. I went off the end and measured in from there and then from there to there. In my case, I didn't bother checking those dimensions. What I did was I knew that I was going to fall between the second and third set of holes from the saw, and I was going to center it between those 4 holes. So it's just a matter of, I just took a steel rule and a straight edge and without the bench dog there, and I just went across there, made a little mark, went across there, made a little mark, a mark about in the center. It isn't going to matter if you're off a little bit because you're drilling it all through the bench and this at once. And then I did the same thing here. I came in, this is the edge of the bench here. I can see that through the holes. And then I jumped over. I didn't want it between this set because it'd be too close to that edge. So I jumped between the second and third hole. And again, just with the ruler, I just sort of crossed it and found the center between those 4 holes. That gets the knob far enough back from the front edge. Again, if I were too far this way, then trying to get it to tighten, I would be bumping into the edge of the fence. It looks like I'm way back there, but remember, the miter track is hanging off quite a bit. So the edge of the bench is, the inside edge of the bench is all the way back behind this hole. So you can see I'm really not that far into the bench, just enough that I've got room to attach it. So I've just made 2 marks, and then I have my washer, and I've given the dimensions, the typical washers that I would use, and I'm using a Forstner bit. I'm going to drill in about 8 millimeters. I'm not going to measure that. I know about where I'm going to go on the Forstner bit. This is a flat bottom hole, and I can go slow. And then all I'm going to do is once I think I'm deep enough, I'm going to check for this. What I want to do is go deep enough that it's below the surface, but I don't want to go much below that because I don't want to cut so far through the 18 millimeters that it's weak in that position. So I'm just going to eyeball it, and I think I'll go ahead and take my scratch awl and create a little starter hole. That just helps me place the tip of the Forstner bit a little easier. And then all I need to do is just take it and put it in upside down. And sure enough, the washer is just enough below there. That'll do a great job. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. Check it and make sure it's below the surface. Perfect. And then I'm going to take my drill bit to go all the way through for the shaft. In this case, it's a 1/4 inch. And I already have the center point. I want to find right in the center, but the Forstner bit has provided that hole, so I'm going to just pretty much hold my drill straight up and down And this one I'm going through, all the way through the bench. So this is going to be the perfect alignment. I really can't get off at this point. Oh, I will say one thing I forgot to do. I've got these bench dogs and they're real tight, but I would recommend, and I did this on the other side, is go ahead and throw in a couple of clamps on before you drill anything. Now I've drilled these holes in the top, but I haven't gone to the bench, so I'll still get perfect alignment. All right, so I've got my bench dogs that have lined it, and I've clamped in. This isn't going to go anywhere as I'm drilling. And now it's just a matter of dropping them in the hole and taking the knobs and tightening them on. With that done, you're safe to go ahead and put on your tape measure. The other thing I haven't shown you in this video that you'll find on the plan is the long miter tracks. The reason I haven't shown you that is I haven't made mine yet. I'll make a future video on doing that. But for those that are going to jump ahead and do those, if you need those now, it's going to be pretty simple. It's going to be exactly like making the shorter ones, only as long as you want them to be. I'm going to start with mine using the full 8 foot, just square the ends, and it's going to end up that long. The long ones will actually be easier than the short ones because the work is already done. I've done the short ones both right and left. I'll run the 2 8-footers through the router. I'll make the T-track and the dado for the tape. That'll just be done all the way through on both of them. And then I will take the left side and lay it on the one that's going to be the left, make my marks for where the cutouts are going to be, and I will actually make the marks for the holes. And I'm going to just use my 20mm Forstner bit with this clamped on and use this as a guide to make the holes in the longer one. And then once I get out to where the longer one continues on going, I'll just take this one loose from that, shift it down, bench dog it into some of the holes that are already done, clamp it, drill those holes. That's it. So all the time I took to lay out the one, and really I don't know if the video made this clear, but I actually only took the time to lay out one of these to get it just how I wanted it to line up with the bench. Then I flipped it over so it was upside down on top of the other side, and I don't remember if I did the right or the left, but I flipped it over and then I used that to lay the holes out because I knew they would be a mirror image of each other. Everything kind of from the center. My goal is that everything I make, the extensions, the router tables, anything I make falls on the same hole alignment as the bench. That's why I'm using the 20mm holes at 96mm spacing, exactly 96mm into the first usable. There's another set of extra holes on the edge, but the first measured hole is 96 in from either end and either side. So it doesn't matter where you're coming from, everything is going to fit. A few other thoughts based on questions I've received over the years from the Paulk Total Station and the Smart Total Station. The miter track and the flip stop. I designed this as a finish carpenter to meet a need that I just didn't find anything on the market. And these cost you about $2 to $3 to build because the cost of the plywood is pretty much non-existent, and you've got a knob and you've got 2 bolts and you've got 3 nuts and a wood screw. So you got that little bit of hardware, and a left and a right is identical. You just assemble the right one's one side, you assemble the left one's the other side, and it gives you this nice big surface. There's a dust channel cutaway in it. I just ran that through the router. I don't think the video showed that. I just set up my router fence and I just ran it through halfway through, just made a mark, ran it by eye. That gives it that dust channel. And then the fact that it can adjust in and out will allow me to do a really good job of lining up the tape right where, as close to perfection as you can get. But then I've got the ability to move this in and out. But I did create enough to make 4 of these, and I didn't assemble the other 2 yet because I'm not sure. I'm using a totally different tape. I mean, the same tape, but obviously another miter track on the long ones. And so I'm going to be very careful to lay it out and get the mark in the right spot. But I could be off a 1/2 millimeter or a millimeter, and I would have to adjust that in the flip stop. So if that's the case, and I'm 99% sure that I'm going to have a separate set of flip stops for the long ones and for the short ones. And so I'll just mark these, you know, right, left, and I'll short miter track. I'll put some kind of writing on this so I'll know that this one goes with the short and this one goes with the long, left and right. Another comment that I want to make is about cutting shorter. So it looks like I can get this into, you know, you've got the interaction with the flip stop and the saw. If the saw wasn't there, if it's straight, I can get this all the way into about 12.5 inches or somewhere in there, or somewhere around 330, 320 millimeters, somewhere in there. But shorter than that, obviously I can't get any closer. And I could design this so that it had a long, you know, nose on it that would run all the way to the blade. But those things are on the market. They're, number one, they're big and clunky. I don't want to haul them around. The other thing is that now I lose that cut. I effectively shorten my miter tracks by that over 1 foot, because now 0 is all the way out here, which means that these have a cutting capacity out to somewhere around 50, you know, with its solid in its track, somewhere around 56, 55.5. And again, these are scalable. If you decided you wanted yours to be, you know, 1 foot longer, there's nothing stopping you from running this just a little bit longer if you don't need the long ones, but you just need the short ones a little bit longer. These are completely scalable out to 8 feet. Beyond that, you'd have to come up with a material longer than 8 feet. But I have found the problem that I have here of cutting shorter material, the solution, the simplest solution is story poles. And because I work in metric and imperial, I cut one at 20 inches. And I use 20 because it's a nice round number. If I need a 2 1/4, I set this at 22 1/4. Or whatever, it's 20 inches added to it. It's just simple math. And then with the 400 millimeter, the same thing. I know that if I want something 25 millimeters, I set it at 425. And it goes on, and I make the cut, and it's perfect every time. It solves a problem I have that I don't want to solve. The other solutions that I've tried and seen are clunky. They just, I mean, you can imagine if I have this and it's, you know, an extra 12 inches on it, and you're dealing with that and moving that around. And I don't know, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes something that's simple hard, and it makes something that's got a lot of finesse to it kind of clunky. And the other thing is with the way this is designed, it fits into that T-track, and it doesn't move around. It's just very solid. And because I have this flathead wood screw here that's adjustable in and out, so when I adjust this, once everything is locked down, it stays just, it doesn't move, it doesn't flex. And a lot of little plastic ones I've seen, and some of the little bitty ones, they've got a little movement in it, and I want to be able to push into these things and have it not move and get the exact cut that I set it on. In determining how close your miter track comes to your miter saw bed, I chose to go up to within a couple of millimeters. I don't know that that there's any advantage to that. I have to make some notches. In the case of the right side, I have to make a notch in the front. In the left side, I have to make a notch in the back. If I just cut this off right to where the opening is, just a square cut, then I would have a gap there between the bed and the miter track.
But again, I'm not really sure that that would make any difference at all. I'm not going to be able to get them, flip stop any closer. So I'm not going to lose any cut capacity. I'm still going to be using these story poles right at the exact same position. And then I don't have to deal with notching those. And if you're using something other than the K-PEX, you're going to have to figure that out on your own. I made this wide enough for every miter saw that I measured the bed. It's wide enough to fit them in. You do have to double check in the swing, because this one, the K-PEX, ironically, I think it's the only one I could figure out that actually used up more space in the back than the width of the bed. So I actually need wider space for the K-PEX than the bed requires. I hope this build video, along with the plans, answers all of your questions and helps you build one of these Paulk Smart Stations for yourself. I know you're really going to enjoy building it. It's going to be challenging, but it's a fun challenge. And when you're all done, you're going to be really proud of what you have. And more important than that, you're going to create a lot of beautiful projects. This tool will help you get there. Thanks for dropping into the Smart Woodshop. You stay safe and have a great day.